Okay, we're live on YouTube now. Good evening. Today is Tuesday, May 26th, 2020. Welcome to this evening's regular meeting of the Oregon City Council. Let's begin tonight's meeting by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge of allegiance to the flag
of
the United States of America,
and
and to the republic
which it stands,
one
nation,
under God,
indivisible,
with
liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, guys. Ms. Evans, would you please take a roll call of council for attendance this evening?
Mr. Davish?
Here.
Mr. Horniak?
Here.
Mrs. Pavlov?
Here.
Mr. Reeves?
Here.
Mr. Seaman?
Jim, you have to unmute.
Okay, I know he's there.
Here.
Mr. Wallenczak?
Here.
Mr. Zale?
Here.
Thank you. Please note that all members of council are present this evening. Also joining us are Clerk of Council, Ms. Tina Evans, Mayor Michael Safarian, City Administrator, Mr. Michael Beasley, Law Director, Melissa Papura, Public Service Director, Mr. Paul Roman, and our IT Director, Karis Dykma, and our Police Chief, Mr. Michael Navarre. Council, the first order of business this evening would be the approval of the meeting minutes for the May 11th, 2020 regular meeting of the City Council.
Mr.
Can I get a
President,
motion? Yes, Mr. Seaman.
I move to approve the minutes as presented from the May 11th council meeting as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Seaman.
Second.
Second by Mr. Reeves. Council, is there any objections? Hearing no objections, the meeting minutes from the May 11th, 2020 regular meeting of council are approved as submitted. Council, we did not have a committee of the whole meeting last week, so we will need to add items 61 through 67 of 2020 to this evening's agenda. Can I get a motion, please?
Mr. President,
Mr. Seaman,
yes, I make a motion to add items 61 through 67 to this evening's agenda.
thank you, sir. Can I
Second.
get a second? Second by Mr. Reeves. Council, any objections? Hearing no objections, items 61 through 67 are added to this evening's agenda. And we will start with item number 61 of 2020. This item is being presented by Mayor Michael J. Safarian and our Finance Director, Ms. Kathleen Hufford. Mayor.
Yes, this is a thing we annually apply for, the grant to pay for approximately 50% of the bulletproof vest that we get here. Chief Navarre is here, give us more details about it to see how many and the cost approximately associated with it.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief Navarre, you're gonna have to unmute yourself, Chief.
I think I can do it.
Okay.
Oh, there you go.
Chief Navarre. Yep.
Okay,
What's that bird doing?
we participate in this federal program whereby they pay for 50% of the cost of a bulletproof vest for our officers. The program's been in existence for a little over 20 years. The cost of a vest today is about $1,020. That includes a ballistic panel and a trauma plate and 2 carrier vests. They have a 5-year warranty. We expect 4 of those will expire in 2020 and 16 more will expire in 2021. It is unlikely that the funding will be available to cover all 20 of those. We never really know how much funding is available until they come out with the program particulars, but we've done very well over the years. We generally get around $5,000 or $6,000. And there's no, we pay half the cost, but we're gonna purchase those anyway. So there's no downside to accepting this.
Thank you, Chief Navarre. Mayor, Mr. Beasley, you guys have anything to add to this?
No, it's pretty self-explanatory.
No, the finance department and police do a good job of getting what we can. We always worry that in general, our grant partnerships shrink a little bit every year over time. We'll see how we're doing.
All right, thank you very much. Council, do you have any questions for the administration on item number 61? Hearing no questions, I will sign item number 61 with ordinance number 61 of 2020 and ask Ms. Evans to read it into the record. Ms. Evans.
Authorizing the mayor and finance director to apply for and to accept a grant from the 2020 Bulletproof Vest Program and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Council.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Zale.
I move for passage of ordinance 61, 2020 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Zale.
Second.
Second by Ms. Pauloff. Ms. Evans, would you please take a roll call of council on passage of ordinance number 61 of 2020 as an emergency measure?
Mr. Zale,
Yes.
Mrs. Pavloff,
Yes.
Mr. Davish,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Seaman,
yes,
Mr. Wallenzeck.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, council. Thank you, council. Please note that ordinance number 61 of 2020 did pass by a vote of 7 yeas, 0 nays. We'll move to item number 62. Item number 62 is being presented by Mayor Michael J. Safarian and our police chief, Mr. Michael Navarre. Mayor.
Yes, even though we buy police vehicles, to get them ready for use, we have to have changeovers and equipment to go with them. This is for a couple of units to get ready to be put into service. Chief Navarre could elaborate on some of the details of the purchase with the.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief Navarre.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. President. This is for two marked vehicles that we purchased through Matthews Ford. And this is the changeover. We budgeted $24,000 in the 2020 budget for this purpose. And we're only going to spend, I believe, a little over $22,000. A lot of the equipment in past years we were able to utilize from one vehicle to the next, but Ford changed the interior of the vehicle for 2020. So most of this equipment is being purchased as new. There's only one item that we're able to utilize from last year, and that's one of the light bars. But DR Evil submitted a price, and they were the only ones that submitted. P&R did not submit again. They did not submit last year. When I talked to the owner last year, he said that it's difficult for him to compete and make any money due to he doesn't do the volume that DR Evil does. But we've had good success with DR Evil in the past, and we have no reason to suspect that we won't continue to have that success. But it's for two marked vehicles, and there's a whole itemized list of about a page and a half of things that we're purchasing and installing in those marked vehicles. It's the same thing that you see every year.
Thank you, Chief Navarre. Administration, Mr. Beasley, do you have anything to add? Nope. Okay, thank you. Council, do you have any questions for the administration on item number 62?
Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. Zale.
Thanks, Chief. You answered a question I was going to ask. I looked through that list. I was surprised that we weren't able to use more of the equipment that we normally do. But I see now that they changed the vehicles over, so that's where the expense came in. But thanks for that answer.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Zale. Council, is there any further questions for the administration on item 62? Hearing no questions, I will sign item 62 with ordinance number 62 of 2020 and ask Ms. Evans to read it into the record. Ms. Evans.
Authorizing the mayor and finance director to issue a purchase order to DR Evil Police and Fire Equipment, 3203 Woodville Road, Northwood, Ohio, for the 2020 police vehicle equipment purchase and changeovers for the Oregon Police Division and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Council.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Zale.
I move for passage of ordinance 62, 2020 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Zale.
Second.
Second by Ms. Pauloff. Ms. Evans, would you please take a roll call of council on passage of ordinance number 62 of 2020 as an emergency measure?
Mr. Zale,
Yes.
Mrs. Pavloff,
Yes.
Mr. Davish,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Seaman,
yes,
Mr. Wallenzeck.
Yes. Thank you, council. Please note that ordinance 62 of 2020 did pass by a vote of 7 yeas, no nays. Move to item number 63. Again, 63 is being presented by Mayor Michael J. Safarian and our police chief, Mr. Michael Navarre. Mayor?
Yes, this is, this ordinance is to live up to our contractual obligation for the uniforms for the police bargaining units. Chief Navarre can give you some details, but this is something we annually do.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief Navarre?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. President. Superior Uniform Sales is the sole source provider of uniforms for our officers and other pieces of equipment. This itemized list is for a contract period that begins on July 1st and runs for 12 months. It represents approximately a 2% increase from last year, but it will not result in an increase in our annual cost because the amounts provided to the officers by contract have not changed, and they will not change for the next 12 months beginning July 1st. So the OPPA members and the FOP command both get $750 annually. Dispatchers get $250, and detectives get $200 for these uniform items, and that will remain the same.
Thank you, Chief Navarre. Council, is there any questions for the administration on item number 63? Hearing no questions, I'll assign item 63 with ordinance number 63 of 2020 and ask Ms. Evans to read it into the record. Ms. Evans.
Authorizing the mayor and finance director to enter into an agreement with Superior Uniforms, 909 Phillips Avenue, Toledo, Ohio, to provide police uniforms and supplies as required by the collective bargaining agreements entered into between the police unions, OPPA, and FOP in the city of Oregon.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Council.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Zale.
I move for passage of item 63, 2020.
Thank you, Mr. Zale.
second,
Seconded by Ms. Pauloff. Ms. Evans, would you please take a roll call of council on passage of ordinance number 63 of 2020?
Mr. Zale,
Yes.
Mrs. Pauloff,
yes,
Mr. Dabish,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Seaman,
Yes.
Mr. Wallenzeck.
Yes. Thank you, council. Please note that ordinance 63 of 2020 did pass by a vote of 7 yeas, 0 nays. Items number 64 and 65 we'll talk about together and then vote separately. 64 and 65 are being presented by Mayor Michael J. Safarian and City Administrator Mr. Michael Beasley. Mayor.
Yes, as you can see, this is the contract with the FOP and the OPPA. Mr. Beasley will probably speak to it as well as Chief Navarre, but this will get us started in the contract.
Mr. President,
Mr. Beasley.
yeah, just a note, this is here where all our contracts are up. Our general approach is going to be to extend all of the contracts for a year with one asterisk that we will have, with one asterisk and one exception. The asterisk is that we're going to extend the contracts just as is, but with the knowledge that each 90 days, the administration will have the option to reopen to deal with economic issues should the economic downturn cause us to need to approach our bargaining units for some significant changes. So we initially just discussed a straight extension for a year, but we don't know whether things are going to be worse than we feared and or as bad as we fear. But we can every 90 days reopen and deal with economics if we need to change that shape. So essentially it's flat, no increases, zero across the board, extend our practices. We're looking to do something along these lines with other units. We just kind of on a little slow process with them. The exception of that is we are beginning the bargaining process with our part-time fire association because we got some broader issues that we think we need to deal with for community safety, and we've openly been talking to the association about that. We'll be beginning that bargaining very soon. So just we're dealing with those broad issues. These are just straight one-year extensions with the right for the administration and the city to reopen once every 90 days, should there be a need or necessity.
Thank you, Mr. Beasley. Chief Navarre, do you have anything to add?
The only thing I would add is I think that both associations should be commended for their willingness to recognize the situation that we're in and not only go along with the one-year extension, but to giving the administration the latitude to reopen the economic each 90 days. I think they should be commended for that. And that's all I really had to add.
Thank you, Chief Navarre.
Mr.
Council,
President.
Mr. Seaman.
Yes, I agree with Chief Navarre 100%. First off, will we be, I think, did Mr. Beasley say we'd be applying this like to the service department at a later point?
Mr. President, we are discussing that. If we are, one thing is we can just slow down our negotiations. There's a couple of ways of accomplishing the same objective. I have talked to AFSCME about it as well. And we'll see where we go. We don't have to rush to do this. I think this is the format as that Mike and the chiefs and the patrol and command resolved. I think that is the best shape to move forward. Some of the other units are looking at what they're doing in other communities, and we will do something like this at every shop, or simply just delay our negotiations so we de facto achieve the same thing. But we'll maintain, our goal is to maintain flexibility moving forward, because we don't know, what our cards are going to be going ahead. So this gives us that flexibility. It's done. And again, the echo of the chief's words, the bargaining units and leadership were just very strong and saying, hey, we understand. And there's a certain trust of police command and administration. They know we'll work together and figure it out. That, we're not going to surprise anybody in the middle of the night. Anything we need to do, we'll talk about like grown-ups and go straight up. So we feel good about that and felt good about the approach and their leadership.
Thank you, Mr. Beasley. Mayor, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Beasley. That's really great of the command and the patrolmen to do what they did. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Seaman. Council, is there any further questions for the administration on item 64 or 65? Hearing no questions, I'll assign item number 64 with ordinance number 64, 2020. Ask Ms. Evans to read it into the record. Ms. Evans.
Authorizing the mayor, city administrator, and finance director to enter into a contract with the Oregon Police Command Officers Fraternal Order of Police, Ohio Labor Council Incorporated, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Council.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Zale.
I move for passage of ordinance 64, 2020 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Zale.
second,
Second by Mrs. Pauloff. Ms. Evans, would you please take a roll call of council on passage of ordinance number 64, 2020 as an emergency measure?
Mr. Zale,
Yes.
Mrs. Paulo,
yes,
Mr. Davish,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Seaman,
Yes.
Mr. Wallensack,
Yes. Council, please note that ordinance 64, 2020 did pass by a vote of 78, 0 nays. Council, is there any questions on 65? Hearing no questions, I will assign item number 65 with ordinance number 65 of 2020. And ask Ms. Evans to read it into the record. Ms. Evans.
authorizing the mayor, city administrator, and finance director to enter into a contract with the Oregon Police Patrolmen's Association and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Council.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Zale.
I move for passage of ordinance 65, 2020 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Zale.
second,
Second by Mrs. Pollock. Ms. Evans, would you please take roll call of council on passage of ordinance number 65 of 2020 as an emergency measure?
Mr. Zale,
Yes.
Mrs. Paulo,
yes,
Mr. Davish,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Seaman,
Yes.
Mr. Wallensack.
Yes. Thank you, council. Please note that ordinance 65 of 2020 did pass by a vote of 78, 0 nays. To item number 66 of 2020. This item is being presented by Mayor Michael J. Sperry and Public Service Director, Mr. Paul Roman. Mayor.
Oh, this one's pretty exciting. So it's a little too exciting for me to handle. I'll let Mr. Roman jump in on this.
Mr. Roman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mayor. This ordinance is needed to submit a loan application for another sanitary sewer lining project. We call it Phase 5, Part A. It's up in South Shore Park. The area is north of Bayshore Road, excluding the Driftwood area, which is newer. The city did receive grant funding from the Ohio Public Works Commission, actually 450,000 grant, 450,000 0% loan. And then the rest of it will be financed with a low interest loan through the EPA. So it'll be a 20-year loan, likely at 1%. But the draft application is in Exhibit A. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Mr. Roman, do you have any time schedule on when this would occur? I think in the documents it said in this fall would it happen?
Yeah, we still have to get the approval from at least the final grant approval from Ohio Public Works by, I believe, August. It's likely we would go to bid in October, November, and it'll probably take a year to construct. So,
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Roman.
Yep.
Councilors, are there any further questions for the administration on item 66? Hearing no questions, I'll assign item 66 with ordinance number 66 of 2020 and ask Ms. Evans to read it into the record. Ms. Evans.
An ordinance authorizing the city administrator to submit an application for water pollution control loan funds available through the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency Division of Environmental and Financial Assistance, and authorizing the mayor and finance director to enter into loan agreements with the OEPA for all such funds and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Council.
Mr. President,
Yes, Ms. Pauloff.
I move for passage of ordinance number 66 of 2020 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Pauloff.
Second.
Second by Mr. Reeves. Ms. Evans, would you please take a roll call of council for passage of ordinance number 66 of 2020 as an emergency measure?
Mrs. Pauloff,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Davish,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Seaman,
Yes.
Mr. Wellens,
Yes.
Mr. Zale. Mr.
Thank
Zale,
you, council.
did he say yes?
He shook his head, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good enough.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, council. Please note that ordinance number 66 of 2020 did pass by a vote of 7 yeas and 0 nays. Move to item number 67. Item number 67, again, is being presented by Mayor Michael J. Safarian and Public Service Director, Mr. Paul Roman. Mayor? You want to go to Paul directly on this one?
Yeah, right.
Mr.
Roman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mayor. This ordinance is needed to proceed with the repaving of Star Avenue from Whittlesey to Wallendorf. The city did receive a $400,000 grant from the Federal Highway Administration, and then we received another $300,000 grant from the Ohio Public Works Commission, and it was scheduled for this summer. So we're on track. City received 4 bids, and the Shelley Company was determined to be the lowest and best bid. The bid tab is included in Exhibit A. Shelley Company has done a lot of other work for us in past years, a couple Wheeling Street projects, and have done a very good job. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, is there any questions for the administration on item number 67? Hearing no questions, I'll sign item 67 with ordinance number 67 of 2020 and ask Ms. Evans to read it into the record. Ms. Evans.
Accepting the bid of the Shelley Company, 1700 Fostoria Avenue, Suite 200, Findlay, Ohio, for furnishing labor, materials, and equipment for the LUC Star Avenue improvements, PID 109196. Authorizing the mayor, director of public service, and finance director to enter into a contract with said contractor and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Council.
President,
Mr. Davish.
I move for passage of item number 67 of 2020 as an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Davish.
Second.
Second.
Second by Ms. Pauloff. Ms. Evans, would you please take a roll call of council on passage of ordinance number 67 of 2020 emergency measure?
Mr. Davish,
Yes.
Mrs. Pauloff,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Seaman,
Yes.
Mr. Wellens,
Yes.
Mr. Zale.
Yes.
Thank you, council. Please note that ordinance 67 of 2020 did pass by a vote of 7 yeas, 0 nays. That is the last item for consideration and passage this evening. At this point, we'll move to the mayor's report. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. President and council. I think you say the correspondence from the fire department, and I'm going to ask council's concurrence in the promotion of 4 individuals to go from recruit to firefighters. And once again, I'll ask council's concurrence in the promotion of these 4 individuals with an effective date of tomorrow, which is May 27th, 2020. And first from Station 42, Dustin Eiler, and from Station 43, Craig Duncan, Billy Gallagher, and Connor Hent. So once again, I ask council's concurrence in the promotion of those 4 individuals from recruit to firefighter, effective tomorrow, May 27th, 2020.
Thank you, Mayor. Council?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Zale.
I move to concur with the mayor on the promotion of firefighter from Station 42, Dustin Eiler, and Station 43, Craig Duncan, Billy Gallagher, and Connor Hentz.
Thank you, Mr. Zale.
Second.
Second by Ms. Polliff. Council, is there any objections? Hearing no objections, the mayor council concurs with the promotion of the 4 individuals that you had indicated from the recruit to the rank of firefighter.
And the only other thing I'd like to say is that we're going to be getting some programs operating in our rec department as things happen, as we learn things, we will make day-to-day changes. We're going to try to get more activity to get a little grass cut and take care of the complex. So we're making decisions, you know, not for futuristic things, but day to day, hour, and making whatever we have to work.
Thank you, Mayor.
Mr. President?
Mr. Reeves?
Yes, Mayor, since you mentioned about the extra, getting the grass cut and things like that, I know we're down about 2 to 3 people in the streets department, and there's been some people calling and complaining about our parks that we have that are off of the campus that need to be cut and things like that and maintained. Are we going to bring back any seasonal workers to help with that to offset? Because I know our street people being down 3 and then people going on vacation or not being there or, calling off, it sort of puts us at a bind. And I do understand that we have had 6-7 days of rain and things like that, but it's, I think we need to keep up with that just to, if it's our city-owned property, we need to make sure that it's maintained because we hold our citizens responsible when theirs isn't. Any advice on that, please?
Well, yeah, and our problem is has been about threefold. Number one, you are correct. We were down on how many seasonals we had employed, and number 2 is we had some our regular work off. Number 3 is we had, well, actually 4 things. We've had some rain where we just couldn't. It was too wet to get in and take care of grass cutting. And number 4, we had one of the large pieces of equipment breakdown. So we're dealing with all those things, and we have to be very conscious of our budget and the funds coming in, so that we work within our. So there'll be sometimes not as timely a cutting as there has been in the past, but we are moving to get more seasonals working, and not only the rec, but for out in some of the other areas. So that's one of those things we'll be doing day-to-day adjustments and just make it work.
I just,
Mr. President?
Mr. President, I know that, when they're calling, and I know you understand this, Mayor, they don't care that we have broken equipment. They just want to make sure that property across from them doesn't look bad for the property that they're trying to maintain.
And they may want to hear something else. We will tell them the truth. That will be out. We might not be timely as we have been in the past, but I don't think you're going to find any municipality that is. I think we're doing, quite honestly, better than a lot of communities, and we will just make the best of every day. And
Mr. Mayor, could we, I know you don't want to get backed into a corner like you say, well, we're going to be there on such and such a date. If we can give like a time to maybe put it on our webpage or someplace where, I mean, they can go on and look and see that, okay, South Shore Park's going to be cut approximately once every 10 days. And then the park at East Moreland is going to be cut once every, whatever it is. Same thing with like the one call that I got today was on Pullman Park. And it does, I mean, I drove past there and it doesn't look really, I wouldn't want to be living by that either. But I do understand about the situation with the lawnmower or the big, tractor, whatever we're using to cut it. But still, I mean, we have to let these people know what kind of schedule we're going to be on for cutting, if at all possible.
And that's going to be difficult to put on a schedule, because we don't know what the schedule will be, what we're faced with each time. But we're going to do our best to do as many cuttings as we can do. We've had several people complain from the Poland Park area, and some got a little testy at times, and I had to remind them. I remember years ago there were people complaining they didn't want us to cut the Poland Park. They want to let it go because they did. Once it was cut, then there would people be back there using it, and they didn't want people back there. So it always seemed like we had, no matter what we did at Poland Park, we had people that did some weren't happy with the results. We will get there, and we're in the procedure of stepping it up a little bit with some of our forces, our employees as well as seasonal. So we don't want to really post anything till we see what we got out there, what workforce we have, and like I said, we'll do the best with what we have and what we're able to afford to put out there.
Thank you.
And it will. That's one of those things that will be an ongoing adjustment thing. We'll do the best we can, and we'll step it up whenever we can. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but I think that pretty much addresses it.
Mr. President, just a note, and Mayor, even in Terry, you said it really well. Even in perfect times, we might have, when you have 6 days of rain in a row, it's going to grow long. This is the season where it gets hot, and it gets rain, it grows fast. It's important for all of us to come to grips with the notion, though, that we are going to cut some services in Oregon, and a question of what are our priorities going to be. We're not going to have as many employees. Our revenue's fallen over $3 million year to date from last year. Let's understand that. We will spend less. We didn't hire our seasonals that we depend on for the mowing. So we can't pretend that everything's going to be the same. And we are together going to have to prioritize to decide what are the things that we're going to make sure that are essential, but we're not going to be able to. Oregon has always been a wonderfully high service city that we can throw resources at things. We're not always going to have those as our businesses are suffering and our residents are suffering, from, some who are downsized out of jobs or temporarily laid off. Our revenue ends up in the same posture. So we are maintaining our high level of services. A few things will be a little bit slower on. We're going to try and prioritize to get that together. And when we get feedback from citizens that we're running by, we're going to hustle. But even in a perfect time, that grass would have been that long because it's just been too wet to cut.
Oh,
And
sure.
it's just, but and as the mayor said, we'd love to announce a schedule. If we schedule, we're going to cut it Tuesday next week, but it rains all next week, it's just going to grow. And so we can try and communicate as best we can. But some of the places we're going to try and have a little bit longer just because it's just the choice that's available to us because we're trying to prioritize service where we think that we need it. Now, if you're getting feedback, let us know and reach out to us. But we don't, there's certain things we don't want to cut back on. A few places we can grow a little longer and maybe be okay. We want to make sure now that we're bringing in about 11 seasonals for rec, since we're adding programming that's starting practice starting up this week. And we're excited about that. So there'll be some more people there to take care of things, and we won't be using the streets all the time to take care of rec grounds. And so it'll give us a little more flexibility, but we're going to try, as we've talked about, we're going to try and get by with a little bit smaller workforce, and there'll be some things we're a little bit slower on. Our challenge is to balance those out and talk about them together so that the public understands where we are, and when we don't want to let something become a problem or an eyesore. So keep your ears open. You'll hear from the public on it as we do.
Mr. President,
Reeves.
thank you. Mike, Mr. Beasley, I know we're talking about bringing 11 people back possibly in the rec area, for doing the maintenance. But when people go out there, and I'm just going to tell you, we've heard it for years. If they got people working out there, the people need to be working. When they're sitting in a golf cart driving around, not doing anything, and people see that, and then they go back home and see that their grass isn't cut. I mean, across the street, that sort of irks a lot of people. So I mean,
Mr. Reeves, I'd like to address that. We've gone over that with leadership over in the rec, and they're going to selectively pick some of the seasonals that they've had productivity out of, and so they understand the limited sources. So we need to have as productive of people as we can, and so that's what people's past practices are going to. They're going to be the ones that are brought in so that we can get the maximum amount of work done. And so I do know what you're saying. We found out from some of the surrounding communities, many of them are not even starting their rec programs up this year. They're like because they don't have the means. And so we're one of the places that are actually going to have services out there. But I think you'll find a lot of the neighboring communities around here are not even starting their rec up at all. So
with all that being said, I mean, being involved with athletics at the high school level, I'm in contact with a lot of other ADs throughout the Northwest Ohio, and like their summer league programs and all that stuff. Like you said, the other communities aren't even starting up, but we just got to make sure that if we got people working, that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and not sitting around. Because like I said, if they go home and they see that a seasonal worker could be cutting that grass across the way, we just got to make sure that they're staying busy. Make it look like you're busy.
Yeah, I understand. They'll have targets on them.
Correct.
They're going to be some, people's patience are going to be tried a little bit now. And we don't want to give them any other additional ammunition.
Correct.
So we, like I said, we're making those adjustments day to day, hour to hour, and adjusting them whenever we can to make whatever we got going as good as we can, as good as we can make it.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Mr. Beasley, you're going to have to turn your mic on.
Just to note, we are I was going to talk a little bit about rec, but also noting our building will be opening up to the public next week. We'll have our staff is all on regular schedule now and it's been restored. So we're feeling good about our direction. We're taking appropriate precautions. We'll be working with the court and using that center entrance. So I feel good about that. And each department is kind of dealing with it a little bit differently. And looking forward to see how it evolves over time. We're glad to have the world opening up again.
Thank you, Mr. Beasley. Ms. Purpura.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Purpura. Mr. Roman.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Mr. Reeves.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Mr. Zale.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Zale. Mr. Davish. Mr. Davish.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. Seaman.
Me too. No report.
All right, Ms. Pollock.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Pollock. Mr. Horniak.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. I don't have any report from my standing committee, but I do want to ask, are we looking to open concession stands also when the games are being played, or is that going to be closed?
Mr. President, the approach right now is, depending on what feedback we get from the health department, is to have something open like grab and go type product. And so that's the direction we're moving in to see if we can have a grab and go product. We're thinking, do we do full restrooms? Do we do portage on? We're trying to figure those things out, but we'd like to have a grab and go product available depending on what feedback we get from the health department in the coming days.
All right. Thank you very much.
And Mr. President.
Yeah, Mike. Mayor.
Just another thing, bleachers are kind of off limit. They'll be for the teams instead of dugouts, using the bleachers. So the parents and the people viewing the games will be on their own. We're going to encourage them to bring their portable chairs, and they'll be setting up out on the sidelines. So it'll be kind of a new thing out there, but that's part of our promotion that we'll be blitzing out there with our social media and at any way we can make connection with the public, that if they're going to be out there viewing, they'll want to bring their own chairs. And I think nowadays most people have those. It'll be a different look out there for sure.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
that'll give the parents more access to yell at the coaches.
They hate that.
The umpires love that too.
Yeah.
Our parents would never do that, Terry. You've got it wrong about our.
Oh, I didn't say our parents. I said the parents.
Yeah.
That never happens around here.
That's others coming in.
Correct.
Yes, visitors.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Thank you. Council, starting next week with the city building opening up, if we do have a committee of the whole meeting, we will look to try to gather in the city council chambers starting next week. Unless any council member has any objection to that, please contact me, let me know if there's anything that you desire in that room. But moving forward, I'd love to have us get back into the council chambers and go at this live again.
Yeah.
One of the options might be we could host a council meeting out at Oski Field.
That would be good.
Go to the fire stations. Remember when we used to go to the fire stations?
Yeah, I don't need to remember that.
Okay, me either. Yeah. Everybody came to the meetings then.
I don't remember that having a great success. But
well, council members, if you do have anything that you would desire to be in the council chambers, please let me know, and we'll look to try to have those in place prior to us meeting in person. With that, I'll seek a motion to adjourn.
So move, Mr. President.
Mr. Seaman?
Second.
Second by Mr. Reeves. Council, any objections? Hearing no objections, this meeting is adjourned.